Hi folks, and welcome to video lecture number 7. Today I will be unwrapping a little bit more of the ethics lecture or PowerPoint that I gave you already. So what I wanted to do a little bit is just spend a couple minutes exploring the point that I made about not adopting a strictly utilitarian point of view or a strictly deontological point of view. So remember, utilitarianism or consequentialism, as we've called it, is basically that we should look to the consequences of our actions as a determinant of whether or not those actions were good or not, right? And utilitarianism is sort of a spin off of that. It says that the most ethical thing to do is to create the most amount of good for the most amount of people in a given situation, right? So, I think that this frame of thought obviously has numerous appeals, right? It asks us to sort of seek reasoned judgments on what our actions will actually lead to, and it asks us to think about those consequences as being kind of like the primary way to determine if what we did was good or not, right? So there might be a few kind of objections to approaching argumentation or debate with a strictly utilitarian view of things, right? The first one is that you will kind of get this example used in consequentialist thinking called the ticking time bomb scenario, right? Ticking time bomb, as I think I explained in the PowerPoint. What if there's a bomb? It's about to go off. We have this guy in front of us. We know, for whatever reason, we know that he knows where the bomb is. Are we ethically justified in torturing him in order to stop that bomb from going off and killing a lot of people, right? And a lot of consequentialists will say this is like a good example of why consequentialist thinking, even though it gets into some shaky ethical territory, is ultimately correct. What people will respond to the ticking time bomb scenario with is by saying that once we've established a framework where we could be compelled to torture one person because we had some amount of reasonable belief that they knew something, that we will essentially find that scenario with anyone that we interact with, right? You never know, especially like if you think about it in the war on terrorism, you never know what any individual person that you capture who's theoretically already fighting against you, you don't know what they know. And so if they have potential information that could lead to, the curtailment of violence in the future, then you might be ethically justified in always torturing those people. And that means that pretty quickly, what seemed like a one time exception to do something that everyone knows is bad and you shouldn't do, torture, becomes sort of like a more common policy, sort of a first reaction to whatever new situation occurs, right? So the danger of consequentialism is that the train of thought, the types of actions that would be ethical under its framework, could become so common that they don't become exceptions anymore. They become ethically bankrupt ways of doing policies kind of all the time, right? So think about other kind of weird questions you could think about to think about why consequentialism might be problematic, right? If we knew for sure that we could eradicate all diseases in the world, but it would take killing a third of the world's population, would that be worth it? Consequentialism, a purely consequentialist framework, might say yes, right? So we might need more. Sorry, there's also like the classic consequentialism example, which is about like the transplant patient. If you imagined a surgeon that has 5 patients dying of organ failure and one healthy patient whose organs could save all 5 of those people, the consequentialist thinking might be we should kill the healthy person so that we can save these 5 people, right? So that example just helps us see that a purely consequentialist view is fraught with peril, and what we probably need are some conditions that will moderate or mediate how we're going to approach consequentialism, right? And so these are things like ethical codes, these are things like legal systems, right? So we have a law that says, okay, we might be allowed to do torture, but there's still going to be some process that makes sure that when we do that, it's done in the most ethical or most legal way possible. we know that that can also be problematic, right? Because sometimes the law can sort of be subverted or pushed aside in service of a consequentialist kind of way of thinking. So, a lot of scholars will talk about Guantanamo Bay this way, and it doesn't matter whether or not you support or think like Guantanamo Bay was right. The point is just that Guantanamo Bay, regardless of how you think about it, certainly operates in sort of a unique and different legal sphere, right? And so what we thought of like laws being able to check purely consequentialist thinking maybe is not so much of a condition that we can rely on consistently. So those are all reasons why a strictly consequentialist way of thinking could be problematic. When we move to deontology, there's obviously a whole host of issues that are also related to this, right? I kind of have given you a bunch of reasons why we should not be strictly deontological with the consequentialism example, right? The ticking time bomb scenario is now something that a deontological thinker is going to have to account for. What do you do when you are put in a situation where one decision, you're faced with like a bunch of bad decisions, right? Sometimes there's no good outcomes. You can probably think about, I bet a lot of you saw the last couple years, the trolley problem, which basically is like imagine that you're on a train tracks and the train tracks divert one way or the other. You have a lever and there's a train coming barreling down the train tracks, and so you can either switch the lever and it will kill one person who's on one side of the train tracks, or you cannot touch the lever, it'll kill four people, right? So, and what is the most ethical thing to do in that instance? There are no right choices, and the world frequently is like that, right? It's not do a bad thing or and nothing happens. It's you do a bad thing or you have to live with maybe sometimes horrible negative consequences from not having taken action, right? So, what do we do when things like genocide breaks out? Are we supposed to do we do military intervention, even though we know that maybe we might be prone to kill some civilians? Is that ethically worth it because we might save people who are being victims of violence? I don't know, right? These are the kinds of like murky territory that deontological thinkers are going to have to think about, right? So also, I mean, it all boils down to if the what if the thing that was the most ethical would also make the world a worse place? Like, does that mean that that's how we should think about how to approach policy or how to weigh decision making? So the point of all of this is A, so you can answer some exam questions and think about this stuff in a kind of more interesting way, and also just to start thinking about how you might approach deliberation and argumentation with these different frameworks in mind. Do we argue from within consequentialist framing? Do we argue from within deontological framing? Could we argue from both? The way that you start thinking about how to process arguments within these ethical frameworks, both in how you encounter them, but also how you pitch them to people, then you will have gotten the substantial takeaway from this lecture. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good day. Take care.